Hey, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensées. I'm your host, Parker Sedecase, and this is a podcast where we explore all the deepest ideas in philosophy, theology, nature, and life. I love thinking about cool stuff, so come think with me. This episode is very, very special. I have with me Christopher Ruoccio. He's the author of Empire of Silence, which I just read. It's the first in the Sun Eater series, which I think is up to 6, and I think he's working on the 7th now. They're all super duper thick. It's space opera, it's science fantasy, science fiction and fantasy. They're fantastic. They're super duper good books. So I'm excited to, if you guys don't know about this book series, I'm excited to introduce you to it. And if you know anything about Christopher Ruoccio, then you're going to love this episode because I get a lot of good stuff out of him. We talk about the history and philosophy of science fiction and fantasy. We get into J.R.R. Tolkien and his influence on Ruoccio. We get into Frank Herbert and his Dune universe and how that's influenced this book series as well. We go all over the place. It's awesome. He's got this really maniacal religious organization in his in the Sun Eater series called the Chantry. And so I asked him about that and to put that in relation with Roman Catholicism because he's a Roman Catholic himself. So it's a fantastic interview podcast episode. I'm really stoked for you guys to listen to this one. Before we jump in, I want to thank everyone who's making this podcast happen. And that's those of you who support the podcast. If you support me on Patreon or on YouTube members, then thank you so much. This is awesome. You guys are making this happen. If you guys like this podcast, if it's in your top 5 or top 10, please consider becoming a Patreon patron or a YouTube member. You can join for a bunch of different amounts, and each level of support comes with different perks. So you can find the links in the description. If you're watching on YouTube, you can become a YouTube member. If you don't want that, then go support me on Patreon. You can find the links in the description, wherever you're getting this at. All right, that's probably enough commodification. Let's jump in with Christopher Ruoccio and let's talk all things philosophy and science fiction.
All right, so Christopher, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So I should say I have a few YouTube channels. I have like 7 of them, and on my biggest one, it's all about like reading and philosophy and study habits. And everyone's been hounding me about reading your book, Empire of Silence. Anytime I mention Dune, they're like, "You have to read Empire of Silence. You have to." So finally, some of my theologian friends have been reading it right now too. And once I saw those guys doing it and talking it up, I was like, "Okay, let's go." And I sat down and read like, I don't know, 300 pages of it. And then I ran out of time. So I had to do the audiobook, and I feel bad about that because I always tell people I don't do that. But I did, and it was nonstop. I couldn't let it go. It was so good, man. So thanks so much for this book.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm really glad you liked it, and it's strange to like hear that theologians are reading the book seriously. It's it's just very. I don't know what to do with that. It's very cool.
I think I would love to not like get you canceled in this, so I will watch what I say and stuff. But I think people, your worldview comes through a little bit, and people are like, "This is cool." You're not trying to slap me in the face with anything. And if a worldview doesn't come through, at least it's not so like teachy, preachy, heavy, right? So a lot of books lately have been like, "You will get this message. I'm writing for this message." Where yours is just a fantastic story where you're like lured into this new world, and there's a lot of Roman Empire type stuff.
Well, the Roman Empire is how you get them, right?
Mhm.
But for me, I'm very much like a Tolkien sort of camp. I grew up with the Lord of the Rings audiobooks on CD. They're the only audiobooks I owned for like 10 years
Okay.
because, those back when they had to be on CD and they were very expensive. And it was either that or go check them out of the library and rip the MP3s. And so I would like read Lord of the Rings all the way through, listen to it, and then I would start over again. And I fell asleep for years just listening to it. So I was like so steeped in it. And the recording had that bit at the beginning about how he detests allegory and, all of its forms ever since he was old enough to detect its presence. I'm paraphrasing.
Mhm.
And all that whole bit there about how applicability and allegory get confused by people and how applicability is great, right? It was something I thought about a lot, even like as like a little kid, because like, what does that mean? And I have to like try and like learn these words. Um, and so I have a deep sense that as a storyteller, right, you like ought not to be, an active evangelist or an apologist or anything like that, but you should depict a place and a time and a culture. And places, times, and cultures are like very complicated and like, multivariate. Um, and like your positions maybe as the author do sort of supersede all of that. But I am far more interested in getting a world in there that's populated by different kinds of people with different ideas and letting the characters sort of speak for themselves. In this case, it's maybe sort of cheating, right? Because I have a first person narrator in the series, and so he does a lot of the talking. Really all of it in a sense, but and he has a very idiosyncratic worldview because he's not really representative of his culture in a lot of ways. But I think that's like the most important thing. I think it was Edgar Rice Burroughs said like you have to entertain first. Above all else, it may be someone else, but for some reason Burroughs is the name that's sticking out to me. And you can do all sorts of things when you're telling stories, but like the most important thing that you should do, especially if you're trying to be commercially successful, is to entertain people.
Yeah.
And the rest of it is gravy, as they say.
Well, so I wonder what role or what place teaching and like slipping in philosophical arguments actually does have in science fantasy, science fiction, fantasy, space dramas. So like C.S. Lewis, I don't know how you feel about Lewis. I could figure you were a Tolkien fan, but Lewis talked about an indirect method of like apologetics, of going in the back door and giving, going through stories and making these really compelling stories, but also having the characters give good, wisdom and truths the whole time. And some people hit him for that. And we're like, dude, you're kind of preachy, man. Others, love him.
Yeah.
What do you make of that? I don't know.
Well,
how you feel about Lewis?
Well, so I like Lewis. I'm not a big Narnia guy. I as a child had a pathological dislike of talking animals, so Narnia was kind of out.
Okay.
I don't know what it was, but Disney's Robin Hood freaked me out when I was really small. So Narnia was always kind of out, and I went straight to Tolkien from Harry Potter at age 5. And so going back to Narnia felt like going back in a certain way.
Yeah.
It just wasn't there. But I love I love Screwtape Letters. I love The Great Divorce. But I still haven't read Till We Have Faces. It's or the Space Trilogy for that matter.
Oh man, those are good.
Holds my education.
Yeah.
And so no, but he's obviously right. I mean, you absolutely can sort of you can sort of sneak these things in through the back door. There was Jonathan Pageau makes a lot about the dog-headed Saint Christopher, right? In Orthodox iconography, as sort of a liminal figure, right? You see him in the doorway of churches because as a cynocephalus, right? As a dog man, he's not really. He's marginalia, right? He's a monster on the edges of the map, and so having in the church would be like putting a gargoyle in there. It's weird, right? And it struck me at the time as an agnostic as no coincidence that we had the same name. And this was something that I had to think about for a long time. It's that was one of those weird coincidences that, isn't one. And so I think a lot about, maybe I would love to be of service, as a writer in some way, for the faith, right? But you can't lead with that, especially in our culture, because people are able to detect it in the same way that Tolkien could detect allegory. And they're like, "Whoa, who put this in my peanut butter?" And they get upset with you. And then you don't achieve either the goal of entertaining them or the goal of making the world a little bit better. And so that's a tricky thing. And so I think you see this in sort of the general attitude people have to Tolkien versus the attitude they have to Lewis, right? There are people who are so oblivious to Tolkien's Catholicism that they insist he was a crypto pagan.
Yeah.
You meet those guys on the internet. I used to run into them all the time. And whereas people's general impression of Lewis is, we get it, the lion is Jesus, right?
Yeah.
And I think I think the gulf between those responses is sort of indicative of maybe the maybe insufficiency of that principle of Lewis's. Yes, you can use speculative fiction to do that, and he's obviously a tremendous writer, but I think the sort of general reaction of people to Lewis is more negative than to Tolkien, and I think this is a component of that because not everybody hates talking beavers or whatever. You know, so so I would like to be of Tolkien's camp, you know, with regard to this particular issue. I hope that that what I've done is create in this case, a future history instead of an imagined past, right? That that feels like a thing unto itself. That people, you know, if they are, you know, Christian, if they're, you know, more specifically, I'm Catholic, right? We'll see that and go, hey, that's very cool. But if they don't see it, right, then maybe they're fine. They're like, this is a really cool space opera, man. Those alien things are kind of weird, right? And leave it at that.
I love that, man. I think that's right. And I think the art comes first, and the message, if you're going to get a message, is too important to lead with it. It's too important to make it up front like that. Some people are like, no, if you're not explicit, it's like, well, look, if it's not explicit, no one's going to hear it. Just like you said, no one's going to buy the book. It's going to flop, and it's not going to be written well anyways. Lewis said, one more thing on Lewis, then I'll let Lewis go. But Lewis wrote this review of 1984, and he mentioned Animal Farm. And he's like, hey, Animal Farm was better than 1984. One, because 1984 had the weird sex stuff. And it's like, well, who are you reacting against? Like, did you have some weird, you know, Puritanism growing up? Why would you think that the totalitarian state would be so against sex? That leaving that aside, he's like, look, by putting an animal face, and sorry if this is triggering it because the animal thing in there. No.
I was going to make a comment.
Yeah.
Of course, Lewis would like Animal Farm better.
That's
right.
right. That's right. He said by making it like by making the character a horse, it like brought the integrity more to the surface. Like it brought that, and I think a similar thing is happening with science fiction in the golden age and the new wave. I think it's like some of these folks are philosophers and they're teaching us stuff, and it's easier to seep into you through a story than it is to read. Certainly to read an analytic paper, but to read, you know, a philosophical book, a treatise, it's like, dude, that it just doesn't get in there as deep as if a talking something says, you know, something about courage.
Yeah, and stories too are interesting because they have the sort of like extra dimensionality to them, where you know, we say like a painting is worth 1,000 words, right? Which always as a writer like made me mad. But the thing about stories is they can say a lot more than is on the page, right? Whereas if you're writing a good academic paper, right, it should be as close to you're saying exactly what's on the page at all times as humanly possible, right? So it's very different rhetorical style, right? Like academic writing is all X is Y, you know, very much just like, you know, linking verbs, right? Very direct, very clear. There shouldn't be a lot of subtext. Yeah. Whereas in literature, in drama, right, you sort of like live for that, right? And then you can have the story actually be something other than what the words are saying.
Yeah.
Right? This is one of the reasons I love Gene Wolfe so much, because so much of Gene Wolfe's writing is what's not there, what's implied, you know, and you can do things too, right? Like a very famous example, obviously, is Dostoevsky with Brothers Karamazov, right? Ivan wins like every argument he and Alyosha ever have, right? He's like right logically, right? Except that he doesn't come out, you know, very well, right? You know, Alyosha's, you know, better off because he's better off. And you're able to play with that sort of dramatic distance, that sort of, you know, that sort of thing in literature in a way that you can't when you're speaking philosophy, maybe more directly.
Yeah.
And people like aren't allergic to stories the way they are to like academic writing. I mean, most people are like, I don't have time for that. That's silly. Like, what's the practical application? Like, why would I ever do that? But most people, they don't see a problem with the story. You know, that self-evidently, like the point of it is to enjoy it. Right. So there's a bit of a, you know, as Lewis is saying, there's a bit of Trojan horse element.
Totally.
Because people are friendlier to literature than they are to philosophy. Well, I think just sort of the average person.
Totally.
Well, now,
yeah,
I had this experience being on BookTube all the time. There's a couple folks I'll get on with, and we'll talk about like sort of the more some of the more academic elements. And you can see half the audience's eyes glazing over. The chat slows down. And you know, and then they'll come back when we start talking about blowing up spaceships, and you know, it's funny.
Yeah,
but yeah, I'm rambling a bit.
No, this is that hits on something really important that I've been chewing on a lot. So I'm starting another YouTube channel because I just love talking about philosophy, and wherever I find it, I want to talk about it. And so I'm starting one on philosophy and science fiction, and called Truth Suffers. It's a line from Dune Messiah: "Truth suffers from too much analysis." And I think that's true. I think, you can I'm an analytic philosopher. And so I know if you go into the, propositional logic, you're going to glaze them over. But if you tell them a story about it, same stuff, you can get in there deep. So, I've been collecting these Starmont editions, of like, uh, OK Dick. It'll be like an overview of his writings and, all these authors. And it's really good. And so I've found this distinction between the golden age and new wave, which to, science fiction people are like, we've already known about this. But from what I've found, or from what I've learned so far, and you could totally correct me here. The golden age folks were like, here's this contraption. Let me tell you how much this lines up with, the current understanding of physics. And people are like, wow, that's cool. And the new wave folks are like, yeah. Anyways, so this guy likes this girl, and here's the deal. And it's all about the human story. Did I characterize that the change from golden to new wave, or how would you?
That's definitely a part of it. So when science fiction started out in the really, it's a question of when it started, right? People like to pick different writers. You get a lot of people say, oh, it's Frankenstein, and that's completely anachronistic choice. But modern science fiction, when it started to be called, science fiction, right, with Gernsback in the late teens and early 20s, right? Because even Vernon Wells, to an extent, sort of prefigure science fiction as an institution. It's like a movement. If you think about it in terms of artistic movements, science fiction really starts with the pulp magazines in the early 20th century. Gernsback in particular was really, really interested in selling the scientific validity of the stories to parents to get them to buy the magazines for their children. So that was sort of an early element. Now this was not Gernsback was not representative of the whole movement at the time. This is the same time Weird Tales is very big, and Weird Tales is not interested in the scientific validity of Cthulhu and all of that stuff, right? Yeah. Because a lot of the genre had not cohered yet. But when you get to the Golden Age, with Campbell, Campbell was so didactic an editor, right? He really was only interested in a certain kind of story, and he ran Astounding, which became Analog for so long that he really his taste came to typify science fiction of the period in the same way that the Medicis typified the Renaissance.
That's fascinating. That's a good link. He loved the Superman, from what I've read. He wants a Christ figure, a Superman figure.
He was, I don't know, maybe not Christ figure, but there's definitely the sort of maybe almost Nietzschean element to his to the sort of hero engineer of Golden Age science fiction. You see this in a lot of Heinlein, a lot of Answell. It's always smart guy solving problem, right? Yeah. And the problem is very technical. So completely right there. The new wave sort of gets into it is certainly more into the human element, but there's also more of a soft science interest that comes in as well. There's a lot more you look at Dune, right? There's a bit more of an interest in biology, than in just physics, right? And in things like sociology and things like Dune is very sociological. It's very ecological, right? This is not physics, right? There's basically no physics in Dune at all. And there's also just sort of more of a 60s cultural sort of milieu that comes in with the new wave. There's a lot more interest in drugs and hallucinogenic drugs. You see that again in Dune, right? Yeah. Dune's very typical of the new wave in a lot of ways, but so is Ursula Le Guin and some of the earlier Zelazny stuff. Of course, a lot of these guys they stuck it out into the 80s, and by then science fiction had sort of fragmented into all sorts of little camps and schools, and now it's the Tower of Babel fell decades ago. Science fiction there's 100 million science fiction.
Yeah.
But
so that brings me to another. That was fantastic, by the way. I really appreciate that. And speaking of pulp mags, I heard that they're redoing Galaxy, and you have an article, and you have a story in one of the first ones.
I have a story. Yeah, Galaxy is coming back. So is Worlds of If, and I am I'm friends with the guy who is I guess, junior editor on both of them.
Mm.
So I don't know when that story is coming out, but I'm very excited about it. Is probably all I'll say.
That's
But
huge. Well-
it's cool to be in like issue 1 of like the new galaxy. Like it's neat. I miss the Weird Tales boat.
Mm.
But like they're all like, well, a lot of like, especially the older writers have a deep nostalgia for those magazines, those sort of brands, and so a lot of them are coming back in some way or other. Like Analog never left. Analog's still around, right? I think they're quarterly now. I think they used to be monthly, but because it's a difficult medium. Like people, science fiction was like old short stories all the time for decades. Like that was really the prestige format for science fiction for the first several decades of its history. And then the novel became more competitive and eventually outcompeted short fiction. But people, writers have this like romantic attachment to the short story, I think, because they can write them more quickly.
My dad writes science fiction shorts only. Like that's it. And that's all he wants to do is short stories. And it's probably a lot for that, but he'll wake up at like 4 a.m. and be like, pumped out 2 stories. They're in your email. I'm like, dang, dude,
That's awesome.
You're insane. I love it. Yeah.
I wish I could do 2 stories before you woke up. That'd be really something. It takes me about a week. But it's satisfying to like finish something that quickly, because these big Sun Eater books take me about a year.
Yeah, man. Like for the folks at home, I saw a video where you were recommending, you're saying like, hey, how long should your book be when you're pitching it? It's like 80,000 to 120 or something, and yours is like 250, and you like edited up, like just
I cheated. Yeah, that's the only real way I think that you stand a chance of getting a long novel, especially post 2020. Picked up as a debut writer, because paper is so expensive.
Yeah.
Like paper is so expensive, it's like causing me trouble because it's hard to get the books reprinted at speed.
Yeah. Which brings me to the main question of the interview. It's about hardbacks. Okay. No, I'm just kidding. I just watched them. I'm a collector. People know that. Like I'm always looking for first editions and stuff, and that looks like the hardcover is just not going to happen, which is sad.
Yeah. Well. There's more hope now than there was a month ago. And there's certainly more hope now than there was 6 months ago. Well, things have been picking up.
Does Dune have anything to do with this?
Maybe peripherally, but the biggest sort of impact is that I've been very well received in sort of the YouTube book critical space.
Yeah, totally.
In the last, really in the last few years, starting with Mike of Mike's Book Reviews, did a very positive review of Empire of Silence back in 2021, I think. And the cool thing about YouTubers is they all watch each other, and so they've slowly sort of, the book has spread out. But in the last couple of months, Patrick Leo and Daniel Green, who's basically the sort of the biggest science fiction fantasy book critic on YouTube, got into the series, and that's done wonders for the bottom line, let's say.
That's
but that's endeared my publishers to me somewhat, and so they've been. I'm not saying that a reprint is coming, but they at least took my calls. Nice. So we'll see what happens.
Man. I love to hear that. Yeah, like I said, like I heard about it because people just kept on inundating my comment section with read this book. I'm like, are you out there paying people to do, like? It's so good, man. But then, like I said, like it's not just on YouTube comments. It's in the theological world now. People are reading it as well. So cool.
Yeah. Well, one of my beta readers is a Dominican friar. So
nice.
I've got that going for me.
That's good. Beta readers is a weird word, because I'm also like, I'm in the wrestling community and jiu-jitsu and stuff. I'm like, beta. What about I want to be the alpha reader. Like
yes, the Sigma reader. But yeah,
that's good.
Yeah, no, it's a bit more in common with beta testing, of course,
right.
But it is hard not to make jokes at their expense.
Yes. I wanted to talk. I don't want to talk a whole ton about Dune. I know that you've been like avoiding it while you're writing the series, so it doesn't like slip in.
Yeah.
A lot of people have told me, hey, if you like Dune, you will like Sun Eater. Oh, what does that feel like? Because I think you're a Dune fan. You like Dune.
Yes, yeah. Well, it was very intentional. And it's become something a little bit more complicated. So when I set out, like I was originally like a big Star Wars kid, right? My dad had the laser discs of the original trilogy, so I got to see the actual films and not the adulterated, Lucas versions.
Sure.
And so that was cool. And then I remember 2005, I think Revenge of the Sith came out, and I love the prequels. I'm the right age to love the prequels.
Can I ask how?
And
When were you born?
93.
Nice. All right, 91. So yeah, same.
Nice. Yeah. And so I remember leaving the theater and thinking, wow, Star Wars is over. That is so sad and tragic and terrible. But like, I got to see it. Like that was cool. As it turns out, Star Wars is not over. Um, very mixed bag.
Depends on who you ask.
Mostly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, but I was trying to figure out like where to go from there, right? And my friend, whose name's Christopher Marcus Gibson. He teaches at Princeton. He's a classical ethics, like I don't think professor technically, but
Yeah, he's
teaches at Princeton.
postdoc, I think. I looked up his CV because I'm like, that's the Gibson, dude. That's him.
Yeah, he's a real guy. I went to grade school with him, and we've been friends ever since. But he was like, "Have you read Dune?" And it turned out he'd seen the David Lynch movie. He hadn't read the book yet, but I wouldn't have read the book because I didn't know there was a movie. And it was like the next logical step for me. So I fell in love with Dune in like 7th grade, which is like maybe a little early. And like I remember I was reading Heretics of Dune my first day of 9th grade in high school, and like man, like a 14-year-old should not read that book.
Dude, no.
It was a mistake. But I fell in love with Dune, sort of late middle school, early high school, and I read it obsessively, and it was Dune that made me change my desire from writing fantasy to writing science fiction, and I had a weird experience reading Dune the first time through, which is that I hated Dune Messiah. I was like, what is this? I've been misled. This book is terrible. Because and I think this is a very common experience people have reading the Dune books. I think they read Dune pretty straightforwardly as a hero's journey, because I think it's written as one.
Yeah.
Maybe outside a couple of Irulan's epigrams, I think it more or less reads as a straightforward hero's sort of journey narrative. I think the more subversive elements only really appear in the sequels, and I think that's why most people who like Dune don't like the sequels.
Yeah.
And I know that like people are like very insistent on this point, and the new film like really dialed up the, let's say, the ambiguity of Paul's character in ways that I found pretty unsatisfying, to be perfectly frank. But that initial book I really really liked, and then I go reading more of Herbert and watching interviews with him, and I just didn't agree with his sense that heroes are bad. Right. Now, like I know when he says charismatic leaders, he means a certain mustachioed fellow from the 1940s.
Not this one, yeah.
And like not that guy, but the smaller mustache.
Yeah.
And so obviously we should maybe be skeptical of certain German chancellors.
Yeah.
But heroes generally, I wasn't buying that. And in any case, I didn't really buy his treatment of like what should we do about heroes. So his treatment of what we should do with heroes is like rely on two of them to reshape human civilization in a way involving fictional psychotropic drugs and immortality, become a were man, and like then we can save humanity from charismatic leaders. We'll get the most charismatic leader possible, and he will be space mustache man.
Yeah.
And that will solve all of our problems.
I can tell you've been on YouTube because you're not mentioning the name, which is great. I appreciate it. So
I accidentally did this on my review of the Dune movie with Mike. I just said the name, and I was like, oh right, you're not supposed to do that. Whoops. Well, I gotta keep. I guess it's not Susan anymore, but whoever is in charge, happy. Maybe it still is Susan. Oh, I can't remember. In any case, I thought about this because like Dune is very much, I'm kind of rambling, but Dune is a deconstruction of like the classic sort of science fiction hero story, right? Particularly characters like John Carter, right? Speaking of Burroughs again, they're both guys who come from outside to this new place, and like through their unique abilities, become king, right? Only in John Carter's case, it's an unalloyed good that he becomes king of the Martians, right? And for Paul, it's like kind of a dark thing. And I well, I sort of ask myself, like, what's the third step here, right? Because we can't just like leave heroism in ashes. We have to go further. There has to be another step. So like, what does an actual like Dune 2 look like, right? Like philosophically, and um, I thought that we need to find a way to acknowledge Frank's critiques of heroes, of charismatic leaders, but try to get them back if we can.
Yeah.
And maybe that's I have a deeply capital R romantic streak. I just I look at stories about Alexander the Great and think, wow, this guy's cool, right? Now, obviously, the guy's complicated,
Right.
but like, I think this guy is cool should be your default response, and then you can go deeper later, right? Because what he accomplished was
make the caveats later. Of course, he's a bad guy or did some bad stuff, but like taught by Aristotle and then took over the world. That's kind of epic. That's kind of cool.
right. Led his men from the front, right? He wasn't Darius the Third, right? Like there's a lot of virtue there. There's and even if like some of that stuff isn't actually true, the fact that our civilization has revered this person, right? Really revered this character, right? As he's so heavily mythologized, is important, right? And the fact that our civilization regards this character and the virtues of this character so highly, right? There's something there, right? Even if what's there is not the historical fact, right? And so I wanted to do a science fiction story that sort of took that basic premise, what do we do after Dune a little bit farther? And to do that, and this is where I get into trouble. I built a world that's very sort of aesthetically reminiscent of Dune's world, and some people can't see past that to the deeper point. So if I get a strand of criticism, it's, man, this guy really likes Dune. And I'm like, well, yes, but I really like Dune, and is what I was hoping you would say.
Yeah.
Um,
I think getting past like the first third or quarter of Empire of Silence, you're like, okay, it's not Dune. It's just like, well, a shield, okay, but you're using shields to take away guns so that you can have a sword fight. And Herbert did that too. But what else are you gonna like? That's a great move.
Yeah, I know sword fights, right? So I or at least I'm better at them than I would be writing Firefly.
You took fencing.
Wanted the sword fight. Yeah.
Me too, man. I loved a good fencing sesh when I was a kid.
Yeah, which weapon?
I was like it was like the YMCA, so it was the round one. It wasn't the
foil.
saber.
Okay.
Yeah, foil. Yeah. And I was a little bit too old for the kids I was going against, and a little bit too young for the older ones. So I just used to whomp on these kids. I wrestled my whole life till I would just destroy these kids. Like not the best form, but just like, dude, I'm gonna get this kid, stab him in the face and stuff. Like, not good.
Awesome.
Yeah.
No, that's great. No, I mostly did foil. I did a little saber. But épée, no thank you. I'm not stabbing people in the foot. That's silly.
Right.
Yeah. But I done a little bit of anima background, tiny though.
Yeah. Well, so sword fights and I love Dune. I think there's like that bell curve meme where it's like the real dumb ones end up agreeing with the real smart ones, and then dumb ones are also in the middle. But it's like Paul Atreides is a hero, and that's like the collapsed head dummy over here. But also on like the smart end is also Paul Atreides is the hero. And in the middle, everyone's like, you missed the point of Dune. You totally missed the point. And you're like, hey, look, Herbert messed up then. Like he just didn't, if that's what he's trying to accomplish, he didn't get it across. And why do I know that? Because he wrote Dune Messiah, and that wasn't enough. So he wrote God Emperor. And you're like, no, Worm Man, you guys got to get it. It's like, well, Frank, man, that might be on you, dude. You wrote a really good story, but it might be on you that like you got to make your point.
Yeah. This is more or less my contention. I love Dune. I love reading Frank Herbert as a writer. But I don't think that he communicated his thesis properly. Most obviously, he like skipped a book between Dune and Messiah. Like if he wanted to communicate that like Paul had become a dictator, like he needs to show that. And he doesn't. He skips to the end of Paul's reign when he feels boxed in, not only by his courtiers, right, but by his superhuman vision. He feels like he can't act anymore, without causing all this stuff. So he's hemmed in. He's deeply sympathetic. He feels like a Sophocles character in a lot of ways. Like just the sort of the fates have completely defined his life for him, and he can't escape anymore. by the time Messiah starts, it's too late for him.
And way more so, even like you're saying, way more than Dune, even where there's like the prescience, but then it's not until you drink the water of life. But you go like, hey man, what was he supposed to do? Because he saved humanity. Yeah, but he killed all these billions. And like, I'm not saying that's great, but what would you do in a situation? No one ever puts themselves in Paul's situation, and when you do that, he does become sort of empathetic.
Yeah, it's difficult, right? Because we always have these sort of, they're not quite trolley problems, right? But we set up these situations where we're like, okay, you've got to act rightly, right? You're in a war, right? Do you use the bomb? Do you not use the bomb, right? And everybody says, well, I don't use the bomb. Like it's terrible, right? But like your alternatives are also terrible,
yeah.
Right? And I'm not saying that we should use the bomb. Right. The bomb is obviously horrific, but like, what do you do like concretely in the real world when all of your choices are terrible? Yeah. You have to do something, right? And I don't often. I think very often we're trying to figure out what right action is in a vacuum doing exercises. I think it's a very different thing than being in the situation. And one of the nice things about writing stories is that you like put imaginary people in the situation, right? And it's very different than trying to sit down and sort of work out the ethics of any given situation, because you have to grapple not just with what the characters are doing, but how they feel about it. And that's in law, right, we have to worry about motive and like other mitigating factors, right, in determining sentence, right, in determining justice. And you can't really do that when you're just working out an ethical problem, because you don't have a person,
yeah,
right? It's just sort of ideas in space. And I maybe it's the Aristotelian in me, but like I think these ideas need to be incarnate, like in a person in some way, for them to have any sort of vitality to them. I don't know that that right action exists in like a platonic space.
Oh
right?
no,
I think
don't
it
do
has
it.
to be.
Yeah, I'm a big old freaking Platonist and Cartesian, but I do appreciate like Cartesian dualism and stuff, or Aristotelian hylomorphic dualism. So we can.
Yeah, I'm a big old hylomorphist. So
yeah,
you're starting Howling Dark. I think that will come through.
Yeah. I'm pumped. I listened to your conversation on it. And well, I want to talk about that too. And there's so many things I need to pull us back because there's so many lines of thought that I want to go through.
Yeah, this is all my fault. I just
no, this is great.
Wind me up and I'll just go.
This is good. So. Well, I've been pretty deep into this because I'm researching for my next YouTube project. I will say, I wonder if Herbert didn't get his idea across in the first Dune because it went through analog and because he had to deal with Campbell, who wanted that not the set, but the Stubermensch figure. And it's like, look, if I want to get this published in analog, that's what he likes. And I did read The Spice Must Flow, which is a new book on that. And that was kind of the idea there. That was like, he subverted it under Campbell's nose. And I was like, I don't know that he did, but I know he wouldn't publish Dune Messiah in there. And that's why it went over to Galaxy. Because it's like, yeah, that's why I know about Galaxies, because I was tracking down all the old things on eBay.
Yeah. It's I think there's some truth to that. I've not read all the way through The Road to Dune, which contains some like earlier draft fragments. And my understanding broadly is that originally the main character is actually part of Kynes, Liet Kynes' father, right? And it was a lot more interested in just sort of the granular like ecological question of terraforming the planet, right? And this whole like warring houses thing was kind of was happening over on the side and like impacted that question, right? It was a very different story. And so I wonder if Campbell's influence might not have been to sort of direct things to the Atreides conflict more generally, and it might just not have been what Frank wanted to write about. Because of course, like he got the idea in the first place from writing a news article about locking dunes down in the Pacific Northwest by planting grass, right? And which is super cool. But I do wonder if it just like wasn't actually his baby to a certain extent, right? Because I know, for example, that like Campbell, when Asimov wanted to write Foundation, Asimov wanted aliens. And he wanted aliens that were at like all stages of sort of technological development relative to humanity and the universe. And Campbell said, no. I don't want any aliens that are more advanced than us, because like we're the best, right? He was very much a humanity number one kind of
Yeah.
guy in his sort of editorial directives. And so he like fundamentally altered the face of Foundation on like in the draft phase
Wow.
by sort of just saying no aliens,
Yeah.
right? If you're not going to do aliens the way I tell you to, Isaac, like they're out. And Asimov was like very much Campbell's guy, right?
Yeah.
At least for like the first, major phase of his career. And so he just did it, is my understanding. And so I would not be surprised to learn that Campbell had a similar sort of titanic impact on Dune in the early phases.
Yeah.
I actually have the analog right there on my wall.
Oh, nice, man. Yeah, I'm looking at mine over here. I love
Oh,
I
nice.
love the collecting, man. I love like, oh, this was one of the first prints. Like, this is cool to see. I wonder who collected this. I don't know. I love that.
Yeah, I love the ads, man. The
Oh, yeah.
the back of the analog is just all old Pan Am.
Yeah.
Pan Am, like they don't even exist, right? It's
I do that
like,
with the comic book sometimes. I'm not super huge into that, but every now and then I'll try and get like, if I really like the story, I'll try and get the original, and then finding like the kids' toys. Like, this is
Oh, yeah.
unsafe. Holy cow, this is awesome.
Yeah, bring back the lawn
Yeah.
darts. Yeah.
Well, okay,
Well,
I actually had a question on that. First of all, since you were 90s baby, Batman the Animated Series, do you ever watch that?
hell yes.
No,
Yeah.
dude, I love it. So I got
Yeah.
I
No,
got
it's the
him
best.
Batman right here on the set. He's waking up from the dream machine from the Mad Hatter. It's like one of my earliest memories. So I'm like, let me just get this tattooed on my arm here.
Oh, yeah, no, it's so good. I actually rewatched all of it right after my daughter was born because feeding a very small baby who's not moving, for really hours a day. So I went through all of it. Man, if you told me going in that the Mad Hatter episodes were like all going to be amazing, I would have said you were full of it. But they are all so good.
Yeah. So I did the same thing with
it
my
was-
daughter. And it turns out she really likes looking at the screen. And I'm like, oh man, I can't, like, anywhere I move her, she's like glued to the screen. I'm like, I can't. So
I made
basically-
the same discovery, and so have moved to correct that.
yeah. Well, I brought that up not just to show off my tattoo, but to ask about comic books. Do you think about like the early golden age of comic books is kind of matches up with the golden age of sci-fi thing. Are comic books, to me, they're different genres, but some people are like, yeah, it's the same thing. Like comic books, superheroes, that is science fiction. What do you think of that?
I think in a lot of ways there's something to both arguments there. Certainly, like back in the day, they were like related industries, right? These are both science fiction publishing, the pulp magazines, and the comic book imprints were like all sort of like New York immigrant, Italian, Irish, Jewish run sort of institutions that were like very much like blue collar working class kind of companies. And that kind of ethos, I think you see like really strongly if you look at like Lee and Kirby, right? You can sort of see them as like sort of the last holdout of like that sort of culture making these stories. But like you have that in the early pulps as well. It's not the old old Wasp families who are making this stuff.
Yeah.
So you get the same people sort of developing these things, and there's a lot of crossover. But like the American comic book publishing industry is so bizarre when you look at it compared to say Japan's or France's or something like that. In that we basically just do superheroes.
Yeah.
And I think that's because there's something deeply American about the idea of the superhero, right? It's this sort of rugged individualism, but also I can shoot lightning. Like it's Superman is the ideal American, in a lot of ways, right? And so they never really. I mean, obviously there are exceptions, but they're not institutionally mainstream the way that DC and Marvel are, right? And DC and Marvel more or less just do superheroes. They're obviously Marvel had Conan for a long time. I think they have it back now. Dark Horse has a lot more variability to them, but the big two have always been really the one thing, always been really focused on the one thing. Whereas science fiction and fantasy literature have always been way more narratively diverse. Now, obviously, I think superheroes are science fiction or fantasy, depending on the superhero. But they also got their roots in the hard boiled genre, right? Or in noir. And so there's other places, because there were pulp magazines for those things
Right.
too. Like Robert E. Howard made most of his money writing boxing stories, right? Like it wasn't the fantasy; it was like the sports adventure stories, right? And so there were these magazines for everything. And really, it's just the geek stuff that's survived the cut. You know, with a couple, obviously, the mysteries are still around, right? The cop shows,
Yeah.
but like there aren't like cop pulp magazines anymore. There still are science fiction ones.
Yeah, they wouldn't go over
they're-
today very well. I guess in
Uh,
certain cultures or
Yeah, it's a harder sell
Yeah,
for some people, for sure.
well, I wanted to ask you. You call your book science fantasy, and I know like Mike from Mike's book review is like, no, it's science fiction, and so is Dune. But man, I think you're right. And I showed my wife the covers, and I'm like, what do you think this looks like? And she's like, well, it looks like fantasy, but he's got like a laser sword. And I'm like, how about this one? And it's like Howling Dark. I told you off air is one of my favorite covers. I'm a sucker for old school, even especially the paperbacks, but like first edition 1960s type art. But this one's very much not that, but it really is just so striking. The Howling Dark cover, it's beautiful, but it's so like obviously fantasy. He looks like he's like an elf or like an evil elf or something, but he's all mechanical. So it's really nice blend where it shows off like this looks like science fantasy, but what is that thing, and what are some other science fantasies that we can like get our hooks in to understand the subgenre?
Yeah. So science fantasy is is exactly what it sounds like, right? It is speculative fiction that has elements of both science fiction and fantasy, right? No, if we want to get like real academic about it, like I broadly believe that science fiction and fantasy are the same genre. I think really it's all fantasy. The science in a lot of, despite Gernsback and Campbell's best efforts, the science in a lot of this stuff is as fantastical as Channel Fireball. It's it's not necessarily that rigorous, right? And so really, I think when science fiction writers sit down to imagine the future, they're not really doing anything different than when a fantasy writer sits down to imagine talking beavers. And but genre really, as we use them in sort of geek culture now, genre really is a sales tool, right? And so science fiction tells a reader that they should expect spaceships and math and robots and planets, maybe, right? And fantasy tells them they should expect wizards and dragons and maybe vampires. Doesn't and it's really that simple for most people, right? It's like am I getting chocolate or am I getting peanut butter? And science fantasy is broadly the Reese's cup of this analogy. You get a little bit of both. I being a '90s kid, also grew up with Toonami, right? I grew up with a lot of anime, a lot of manga, and a lot of Japanese fantasy has like no scruples about just throwing a robot in there. It's like, there's a robot in this wizard story, enjoy. And I loved that as a kid. I was like, what, you can do that? And of course, Star Wars, does this too, right? They're space wizards. And I hated Star Trek as a kid. I was like, these outfits are terrible. Everything is boring. There's been 0 sword fights. This is my 5-year-old brain, which is really not so different than now. But I saw Star Wars first, so I was so disappointed in Star Trek. I just
I'm exactly the same way. Exactly. My dad would make me watch like the '60s version. And I'm like, okay, I like the ideas, but I can watch this on Saturday in Batman the Animated Series, and he's going to do it he's going to punch the robot, and I want to see that. Or he's going to, there's going to be some ancient wizard. It's all going to happen, but he's going to be Batman fighting him. So.
Yeah, no, we clearly are the same person. I would much rather the ideas do something in the story than just be talked about. And so Star Trek was always very off-putting to me. Obviously, there are exceptions. Who doesn't love Wrath of Khan? Right, and there were great episodes, but but I always I wanted to see the sword fights and spaceships blowing up and jumping off things. And if we could talk about serious ideas at the same time, that is all the better, which is why I liked Dune. Right, Dune felt like Star Wars for grown-ups, and in 7th grade I was 100% a grown-up, so I was all in on that. So I would like to be able to do both, but science fantasy we'll do all of these things. Now, whether or not, you call any particular work any one thing is broadly a shouting match in nerd culture, right? So when Mike says that Sun Eater is science fiction, like, sure, it is that, but it is also fantasy. And my thinking basically was very mercenary. Fantasy is a much more commercial genre than science fiction is. Science fiction is a lot more niche. And I wanted to write something for a larger market. So I lobbied pretty hard. Dahl labels their books science fiction or fantasy on the spine. I was like, please put the fantasy label on the spine. And like, we can't do that though. Like, it's clearly science fiction. You've got spaceships. And I was like, yeah, okay. But as the series goes on, the sort of supernatural dimension of these things gets more and more pronounced. And so you have that to look forward to.
Yeah.
But I call it science fantasy basically because I want to sort of mitigate people's expectations, right? I don't want people who are trying to read a science fiction book because they want to learn about quantum theory, right? And see it like, strangely and marvelously applied to be disappointed. I want them to know you're getting sword fights in space. And I, in a lot of ways, am like more a new wave writer than a golden age writer.
That's why I brought that distinction up. I was hoping to
yeah. Yeah, I really, I think my heart's like with new wave space opera in like the 80s, which is like its own separate thing.
that was my next one, Matt. You got to help us with space opera too, because I'm like, is Dune a space opera? Is Star Wars a space opera? I don't know.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
But all that means really is that like it is a big sort of dramatic story set with on a backdrop of like multiple planets, solar systems, galaxies, whatever.
Okay.
Right? So like
Is Foundation,
Flash. Yeah, it is. Okay. But Foundation, being Asimov is like a lot more staid. It's a lot drier.
Yeah.
It's not as sort of Elizabethan an affair as Dune is.
Okay.
But it is a space opera. But that's really all that means. A lot of these terms are like not very well defined. I'm always like vaguely amused that science fiction readers don't seem to really know what a genre is because they think science fiction is one. Like science fiction is and fantasy both are sort of meta genres. They're bigger than genres. Because you can do as I've done a memoir in science fiction, right? Sun Eater is written in first person. It's all one guy's account, right? It's a memoir, right? You can do adventure stories, you can do mysteries, you can do comedy, tragedy, right? Like those are types of stories, right? Where science fiction is bigger than that. It's a type of story with like a certain kind of window dressing, right? And so we need like another word for what science fiction is.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these terms are very loosey-goosey is the point, right? So like, if I were differently inclined, like I would just call Sun Eater a science fiction story. But like I said, I wanted to manage reader expectations so they know that if they like fantasy, this is a science fiction book that's like safe for them, right? Yeah. And like vice versa. Because there's also a stigma that fantasy readers have for science fiction. They think it's hard because they look at something like Foundation, right? Or like what's the new one on Netflix? They look at like the Three Body Problem.
Oh yeah.
And they'll say this sounds hard to me. Like we're doing like 10 dimensions. Like I don't know. I haven't read it. But it sounds too hard for me. I'm not qualified. I'm gonna go back to Game of Thrones, right? And like they're selling themselves short, like it, but
because they can follow the politics of fantasy and like all the different names and crazy stuff. And this guy had this horse, but now they lost the horse to this person. It's like you can follow a train of thought. You can follow hard stuff. It's just you have the stigma of if it's got sciencey or quantum in it, then you can't follow it.
Then it's just hard. Yeah. And so I wanted to try and escape that presumption because I wanted people to read it. And so I started calling it science fantasy just to sort of cover my bases.
Yeah.
That was a pretty mercenary move.
I like it, man. I can definitely dig it. I started with sci-fi. Oh, I also learned you have to use the right words. So you can't call like high art science fiction sci-fi. You call it SF if you're going to be writing.
Oh yeah, that is an older code, sir. Yeah.
I've learned I've stepped on that one a couple of times and okay, sci-fi is for like the Sci-Fi Channel originals and stuff like that. And SF is for like Alfred Bester and stuff. So
Yeah, my understanding of that is that is really sort of a fandom politics thing. Because one thing that like people don't, you hear the word fandom thrown around a lot by people who may have used Tumblr too much. Uh, but there was originally like one group that called itself fandom, right? These are the people who like made the World Science Fiction Convention and like the World Fantasy Convention and attended it annually. And so like they called themselves capital F fandom, right? This is a distinct group of people and like a distinct culture with a time and a place and like customs and stuff, right? If like you've ever been to not like one of the big Comic Con like corporate conventions, but you've ever been to like a smaller like local convention, it's like run by the same people every year. And it's mostly like an older crowd these days because it's people who were going to these conventions, at this point in like the 60s and 70s and who were like running them still these days, right?
And they're all friends. They know each other from back in this convention and that, and they got these inside stories of going to the bar afterward.
Yeah, and like weird grudges,
Yes.
and like all this sort of like personal history and stuff. And what's so bizarre about it is like very little of it is documented anyway. Science fiction fans have like not really preserved their culture, right? But fandom refers to like this one group of people. My understanding is the capital F fandom people, in order to differentiate themselves from the sort of corporate sci-fi channel, right, associated people. I think there's like a lawsuit even that was related to this because like sci-fi was trademarked or is trademarked, and I don't remember the details. But the people who run the World Science Fiction Convention said, yeah, we're going to say SF because we're like not those guys, right? So again, I don't remember the details, but I think that was basically where that came from. So you're looking at like one of the shibboleths of like a little insular culture that sort of helped to build the medium.
I love that. Thanks for filming in. I love shibboleths. I want to be on the inside of every single one. I love it. I love the research of it. I don't want to be a snob about it, but sometimes I am. But I just want to know the history. I just think it's fun to research that stuff. I I wanted to ask you. I'm nervous about this, but so I got into SF. I got into science fiction through Philip K. Dick, much to like my dad's chagrin. He's like, man, my dad's classic. He's like golden age. He wants it, and he's a Christian, so he's like, good must triumph. And he's like, oh, No Country for Old Men is the worst movie of all time. I'm like, no, dude, like you can subvert some stuff here and there. And Philip K. Dick is like C.S. Lewis on LSD with like little to no hope. It's like he doesn't close all of his lines of thought. And you're like, wait, what happened to that one? You took me somewhere, took me to an alley, and you just left me. He didn't close this loop. And I actually really like that. But I wanted to ask you, like, I'm nervous because PKD is one of my favorites. What have you read any of him? What do you make of?
Oh yeah, sure. No, I'm with you. I love PKD.
Okay.
Yeah, no, he's great. That's like the most apt description of him I've ever heard too, because the that C.S. Lewis on LSD is more or less literally true.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, have you read like the weird stuff like exegesis and
I have it back there somewhere. I haven't read it yet, but yeah, the trilogy. Well, I've read the first two of the trilogy, and you're like, okay, dude. So he's doing the same thing that Lewis did in The Great Divorce, where Lewis writes himself in as like the main character, and you're like, wait, you haven't read this yet, and it's not a spoiler, but on the Silent Planet, Lewis writes himself in. He's telling the story, and the main character is actually about Tolkien. His name's Elwyn Ransom, a friend of elves, Ransom because of Christianity. And at the end, he's talking about it back in Oxford, and you're like, wait, I wonder, did Tolkien actually get like abducted by aliens? What the heck's going on? But, Philip K. Dick does the same thing in that trilogy. And you're like, is Bill okay? Should someone check on him? Like
he was not okay. Yeah. Do you not know? Or
well, yes, he's all over the place, right?
Yeah.
But hearing some people, he's like, yeah, he returned to Christianity, but then he bailed on Christianity and this and that. He was okay. And so many people want to say like, he was all right. He didn't actually use that many drugs. And other people are like, he was using a lot of drugs. So
yeah. Oh no, big time. Yeah. I am friendly with Tim Powers, who is one of my favorite fantasy writers of all time. He knew PKD when Powers was in college. PKD was like a bum who like crashed on their couch, basically.
Yeah, for sure.
And he actually, if you hear time, he did an interview with Media Death Cult. Powers did about PKD and like knowing him like towards the end of his life, and it's just super super fascinating. I've heard Tim talk about it on and off, and it's just like he wasn't a well man, but just like he probably had some kind of
Yeah.
schizophrenia.
And like
Right.
he probably thought
Yeah.
we did live in a computer simulation, right? Like, I mean, he said that at a convention, and you're like, I think you're not promoting a book right now, so I think this might be real.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah, no, a completely like fascinating character. Like not a well man, right? Just like I feel, I feel bad for
Yeah,
him, right? But an absolute
totally.
genius, right?
And he
And
studied philosophy in undergrad, so I'm like, all right, we got me. So I'm rocking the Android Dream of Electric Sheep shirt for this one, and I may have got it
yeah, no,
tattooed on my arm too. So I like
oh
him. I
nice,
like this guy.
yeah. No, I mean, he's tremendous, right? And my favorite thing he ever wrote though is you ever read Imposter? It's one of his short stories.
No,
Um,
I haven't. Oh wait,
well, yeah,
I've read a bunch of his collections of short stories. I don't think I've read Imposter. Is that about alien taking over someone's body?
uh, yeah. Basically,
Sorry for
they made a
spoiling.
movie. They made a movie out of it with Gary Sinise back in like the aughts. I think
Okay,
that's they like add a bunch to it, right?
yeah,
Because it's a short
yeah, they
story,
do
but
that with all of it.
the core of the story is there. Um, and but that was one of my favorites. I had a great privilege. I had a science fiction literature course in ninth grade. I went to like a magnet school, so they just had an extra English class that was science
Oh,
fiction
nice.
literature. So I was taught by a capital F fan for like a year, and I was made to read books that are like 50 years too old for me, right? And so I find usually when I talk to like those old fans, they're like, "Who are your favorite writers?" And I'm like, "Oh, like once I set aside like Gene Wolfe and Frank Herbert and stuff, I'm like, oh, I really like I really like Lee Brackett and C.L. Moore, and they're like, "How old are you?" Uh, well, I cheated a little bit.
That's how
But
my dad gave us all a copy of The Star's My Destination, like his favorite book by Alfred Bester. And
yeah,
he's like, you all have to read this. And so reading that, and you read some other stuff, and you're like, oh man, I don't know if that's, he kind of set the bar pretty high. Then learning more about Bester, and you're like, this guy was a crutch. Like he despised all the other science fiction guys because they were the golden age people. And he's like, can you write? He said about shoot, one of them, one of the famous ones. I wish I was better at the names. He's like, man, can you go like do some drugs or something so you can actually experience the human condition? Because we're sick of you writing about the machines. Like, can you give us a good story? I'm like, dang, that's pretty wild.
got him. Yeah, I tend not to like the golden age stuff very much. There are
Yeah.
exceptions, right? I love as well as Last Question is my favorite thing he ever wrote. It's one of his short stories.
Have
Um,
you read The End of
uh,
Eternity?
no,
Okay, so that's my second favorite science fiction book. It's by Asimov, and it actually makes me like love my wife more the way he writes about the woman in the story. And I'm like, dang, dude, this is awesome. It's the story
no,
behind Loki. So
his no,
Loki and the Umbrella Academy totally just ripped it off completely. And I don't know if they ever like cited him at all, which is okay, I guess. But it's that story.
many such cases. I was taught by a guy, John Kessel, who probably wrote Eternal Sunshine on the Spotless Mind.
Oh, yeah.
Um, uh, he had a meeting to sell the rights, and they passed, and then the movie came out.
Yeah.
And they're like, "What are you talking about?" And I think he did try to sue them, but it's suing Hollywood is a fool's
Yeah, I
errand,
can
right?
imagine. That's like the Truman Show and Philip K. Dick's Time Out of Joint. And you're like, wait, this is Truman Show, but better. Truman Show is amazing, but yeah, they ripped it off. Which
Yeah.
is okay. Well, actually, I wanted to bring this up too. So maybe they ripped it off. I got to be more careful about this stuff. But you said once, I listen to a lot of your stuff lately, so it's all in my head. Art is agglomerative and referential, and so sometimes
But
it's just like, hey man, like I'm doing this for the other fans. Like I'm pulling this in as a nod to you, so you can be on the inside with me.
yeah, 100%, right? And I think that's true of people who like make movies too, right? I think we're very quick to assume like
Yeah,
malice on the part of especially Hollywood, right? Because it's like a big corporate machine. But somewhere in that production is somebody who like cares,
yeah,
right? Like maybe that's not the director, maybe it was the screenwriter, right? But like somebody like wanted to tell that story, right? Like, is it for money? Yes, but like so is what I do,
yeah,
right? I have a tremendous privilege and opportunity to be able to provide for my family by telling stories about space Romans. And that's great. But like I am providing for my family by doing it. But at the end of the day, right, and this is like very clear, like I mentioned I didn't like the Villeneuve Dune movies very much. I feel like a lot of the weirdness and sort of the color was sort of taken out of them. And despite being the longest adaptation of the book that exists, there's like less than is in the miniseries, and there's less than of the book than is in the Lynch version. It doesn't make up weird stuff like the Lynch version does. Like, what are those weirding modules?
Yeah,
but like, it's very clear watching Villeneuve talk about the book that he loves it, right? And he understands it. He understands it a little bit differently than I do, right? Like, he's very much in the like Paul is the bad guy camp, right? But like, he cares about it, and like it's infectious. Like watching him excited about the Lego Ornithopter, right? Because like he wanted it when he was a kid, and so it's like they're not my favorite Dune adaptation. There's a lot I like about them, but like I love that he loves it. Well, the same feeling with like Peter Jackson and Lord of the Rings. Like, man, that's like hashtag not my Faramir, but like David Webb did a good job, and it's clear that they cared, right? And so like a lot of people when they like they come in, I remember I did one story for Marvel Comics, and it's like 10 pages, but the contract for it is like 800 pages long. And part of it was like, look, like if you pitch us ideas and then like a year later, a story that's basically the same as your story shows up, please understand that we get pitches from like hundreds of people all the time. And like the odds that they have pitched basically the same story are almost 100%. And like, you can't sue us. And I was like, fair enough. Right. And there's an element of that in a lot of things. I remember, here's an easy example, a couple of easy examples. Well, I have never read Red Rising, which is pretty popular for anybody watching who doesn't know. Is another pretty popular science fiction series, way more popular than mine. He's been on the New York Times list. I have not been anywhere close. And people were like, oh, clearly like Christopher liked Red Rising and is like ripping that off. Like, I don't even know what that is. Is that like about the Russian Revolution? Like, what's going on? And I didn't know until people started comparing me to him. And a similar thing with like Warhammer 40K. I've like never read I lost you there for a second.
Red Rising. Red Rising, Russian propaganda film.
Probably. No, it's about like space Rome on Mars, right?
I haven't read it either, except the booktube folks talk about it. Like Mike talks about it all the time, and I think Jared Henderson
Mike's a big fan. And like Pierce Brown seems cool. I'm here for space Rome. Like, that sounds fun. But I've never read it. Well, it's just that like Pierce Brown and I like both like Rome and are interested in it, and wanted to do space. So like it just happened, right? Same thing. Like, I've never read like Warhammer 40K. I've read one short story because I had to for work, actually. But beyond that, like I'm not like a Horus Heresy kind of guy. Like, I've never read any of that stuff. People assume I am because I have like a space empire that has an inquisition and whatnot, right? But these things just they do happen, and they happen organically, and like that's okay, people some people get really hostile about it. Again, like this is like the one thread of criticism I get is like, what did you think you could sneak Dune past us, bro? Like everybody's read that book. And I'm like, well, I was hoping that you would notice that I also have read Dune, and like, why am I doing this? Like, why did I make these choices? And because there are reasons to do that, right? We have this idea really acutely in science fiction, I think, but in maybe modern culture generally, that like every work of art should be a new creation. And like, we can't do that actually as human beings. Like, we can't make a new creation. We can, as Tolkien would say, subcreate, right? We can take the pieces that like are already here and put them together in novel forms to try and say something meaningful. But this is why so much stuff that like is new is like obviously ugly, right? It's Duchamp's urinal just turned upside down. He's like, look, I have made a new creation. Which one you didn't actually? You just turned a urinal upside down that already existed. And what you've done is made it worse and wasted everyone's time. But people do this in story form in all sorts of ways. So like, look, I made Star Wars better. And did you? It's not clear.
Well, and some of
Um,
your so some of the things you're pulling from are not so obvious. Like in one of your videos, I saw one of the influences for Karn's robot dog or something. I haven't read the book yet, but one of the
oh,
influences
he has
for
a butler.
Butler was
Yeah.
from Digimon. And as the 90s
Yes.
get, I'm like, let's go do, because Digimon is also like a little bit niche. Everyone knows about Pokemon. Not everyone knows about Digimon. And there's another one too. I forgot, but there's like these insiders, and some of us had to because our Christian parents knew about Pokemon, but they didn't know about Digimon. So you could go and do that instead. But
Oh man, I got in a lot of trouble for watching Digimon actually, because I don't know if you remember, there's a plot arc with this sort of vampire villain who gets brought back from the dead, and there's this whole thing about like he will come back at the hour of the beast, right? And my dad is like, "What are you watching?" And never again. Well, and I was devastated because Digimon was awesome.
yeah, I've had some of those with like Dragon Ball Z. I didn't have cable growing up, so I had to watch Dragon Ball Zeta on the Spanish channel, and my friends would have to interpret for me later. I'd go to school and be like, dude, I didn't catch anything. Is this what happened? Like, no. Let me tell you. Then I would rent them from Hollywood Video, and I would just watch them by myself until my mom would come in and be like, what are they saying? Is that a swear? What's going on here? Dang. Yeah.
No, yeah, no, my parents were very careful about what I was allowed to watch. Because I was the oldest kid. By the time my brother came along, they gave up.
Yeah.
Um, but this is actually like how the Star Wars thing happened. Is they watch Star Wars and like Star Wars is fine. So you could just watch Star Wars. So I watched Star Wars all the time. And it just like became the Star Wars kid because of that.
Yeah.
And that sort of my parents like very careful manicuring of what media I was allowed. At least what visual media, they like did not check my books at all.
Yeah, you got Harry Potter, man.
Um,
I grew up evangelical. That was a big no for us.
Yeah, my parents were my parents was glad I was reading, and I was reading like really early and like above my reading level. So like it was a big thing. And my parents were pretty cool with that. My aunts and uncles, on the other hand, not so
Yeah.
much. They were like, "What are you?" Because my mother's side of the family is all Protestant.
Yeah.
And they were like, "Whoa,
Yeah, we don't play that
what
stuff.
is
We
this?"
don't play that witchcraft unless it's in Lord of the Rings. We can definitely read that.
Right, then it's
Yeah,
fine. Yeah,
that's
it's
right.
fine. Gandalf can light as many pine cones on fire as
That's
possible
right.
because he's an angel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My dad's funny, man, but he wouldn't let me read Harry Potter until I came home from college and saw him reading all of them by himself. He's like, "Oh, there's nothing wrong." I'm like, "Thanks for ruining my childhood." But
Yeah, got him.
yeah, behind me, he bought me all the Conan the Barbarian, Conan the Warrior, all the little novellas of Conan. I was allowed to read Conan just slaughtering people left and right, but it's because he didn't use spells.
Right. Well, he derived sorcery actually. So
That's a good
Conan's
point.
he's one of the good.
Yeah, that's good.
Oh,
Yeah. That's really nice. Dang, that's a good point, man. I should bring that up to him. I wanted to ask about the Scholiasts. And am I saying that right? Is it Scholiast?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. School.
Dude, I want to be a Scholiast, except for the fact that I think they're Stoics. Are they all Stoics?
None of them. No. Not precisely. They there is sort of a Stoic element where they're like, look, we have to do some human computer stuff, so we need to like strip out our emotional biases.
Yeah.
But there are ways to approach that aren't necessarily Stoic. It's just that like Gibson kind of is one.
Yeah.
And Hadrian is a terrible Stoic.
Yeah, right. He's always got to try and I don't want to say the litany, but it is kind of litany of like
Like obviously this was sort of me trying to do mentats, but also me trying to say something about mentats because like I don't think the human brain can do that actually. But you can do something that's like it, right? And like maybe we can push our ability to like sabotage or something a little bit further than we have, right? It's like clearly the case, right? I have a classics background, like we've lost our ability to memorize stuff by rote more or less as a species. Like most people can't recite like a single poem anymore. But like Plato writes about this, right? He's like, look, like this whole writing thing, it's cool and whatnot, but it's gonna ruin the kid's ability to memorize Homer. And like they did memorize the Iliad, like it was like a normal thing to be able to do that. We can't do that anymore. So maybe those abilities are still in there. It's not clear to me that that Darwin's fish has walked too much further away from the golden age of Athens. So that those abilities got to be knocking around in there somewhere. So they would try to bring that stuff back rather than like actually be, the human computer, the eyes blanking out, and telling you how many Solaris it's going to cost to transport yourself to Arrakis, right? But they like fill this niche because, we talked about how I brought the shields from Dune because I wanted to write sword fights. I wanted to marginalize AI because I didn't want to write an AI story,
Man, yeah.
right? Or at least I didn't want to like deal with the practical problems of having advanced computers in my murder mysteries and stuff because it gets harder.
It gets
Right,
harder and
it
it
gets
instantly dates them a little bit. So maybe you're like cutting edge today and you talk about large language models. And then like 2 years from now, people are like, I can't even read this because it's so out of date now.
yeah, we don't use those
Right.
anymore,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah, it turns out that was a dead
Mm.
end. Yeah, you run into that a lot with science fiction. I always laugh reading Neuromancer, right? And they're using tape decks and stuff.
Mm.
Everything's on microfilm. Although weirdly, I think microfilm is coming back.
Yes.
Because yeah, they found a new way to like store long-term data on it. So like maybe we'll have them back. Who knows?
Dang, I'm
But
sorry.
it'd be kind of cool. But in any case, so with Scholiasts, they serve this function where they're like supposed to be replacing a lot of the like higher computing functions in society. Their job basically is to like know all the stats and all this stuff, but they do that mostly like by like rote memorization and like mnemonic tricks
Yeah.
and mind palaces and stuff like that, and not by like being a human computer. Like Frank is very vague on like what that means.
Yeah, they
right?
go through training and stuff
Um,
like that, but it's like, what is that training? Because that's pretty cool. So I study analytic philosophy, and a lot of the analytic philosophers are just trying to be mentats. Actually, like there's this whole movement or subdiscipline, subfield called Bayesian epistemology, where they go into Bayesian reasoning, and it's supposed to be like not subjective, though it is kind of subjective. If they're listening right now, they're getting really angry at me, and I'm sorry, guys, but they're trying to turn themselves into human computers and do calculations on, should you believe God exists? Well, what are the prior probabilities? And let's go in and let's make it a math formula. And it's like, oh, Pascal would be really mad, dude. Like you just took away the whole human element. But that's analytic philosophy. That's why I love Dune Messiah, because he makes Hate, who is the resurrected kind of Duncan Idaho, he makes him a mentat and a Zen philosopher. And it's like, dude, that's like Aristotle, like super good at logic, but also he can give you like some eloquent language as well, and a riddle or something.
Yeah. Oh no, Hate's the best. I know. I started out saying like I hated Dune Messiah the first time, but like that part was always
Yeah.
cool. Like the last 50 or so pages of Dune Messiah. Once Paul goes blind, like all of that's awesome, right? And then I actually really like Children of Dune.
Yeah.
Personally, it's very Game of Thronesy, but like Hate is awesome. I can't wait to see if Jason Momoa can
They
pull it
would be
off.
sweet.
I have my
I want to
question.
see the eyes, and I think in my head the eyes are always like the metallic eyes of that one Jedi, who was more prominent in like the Clone Wars. You know what I'm talking about? He's got like the whole like metal.
Yeah, is that? Well,
I'm not a name guy. I'm terrible.
show my credentials here. Yeah, I think it's Plo Koon.
Okay, that sounds right. Yeah, Master Plo Koon. Yeah.
He's got like the mask too,
Yeah,
with
yeah,
the
yeah.
spikes.
I always imagine
They-
like the metal eyes, but when I'm reading it back now, I'm like, I don't know if that's right. But whatever the case, give them the metal eyes. You got to.
yeah, I think it'd be cool. They've never quite gotten that detail right. Or rather, when I say they never have, I mean in the one time we've seen Dune Messiah on screen, which actually the miniseries, the Children of Dune miniseries, is one of the more faithful adaptations.
I've been looking forward to that because I heard you talk about that with Mike, and I'm like, okay, I need to find it. And now it's really hard to find. It was on YouTube, but I think you guys talked about it too much, and then they took it down.
And they found it. Yeah, it or the movie coming out, somebody definitely noticed it. But yeah, no, it's really good.
There's this in it. Okay, so I didn't really pay attention to Dune Messiah the way other people did, where they're like, yeah, look, or like, no, he killed my character. I love the proverbs, I love the aphorisms, and that thing was chock full of them. And there's this beautiful line where Paul is asking Hate a question, and he's talking about his like lucid, crazy dream. He's like, yeah, I saw the skyfall or something like that. And he comes back with like a Mentat calculation, and he's like, I asked for the Zen Sunni and I got the Mentat. And I'm like, isn't that the story of every philosopher who's ever studied in America? Where we're looking for aphorisms, we're looking to be wise sages, and we end up getting this logic chopper who's like, no, that's wrong because of A, B, and C. Dang it, dude, what am I studying? So I just loved it for that. It's a special place in my heart.
Yeah, no, all those interactions they really make that book. I'm really looking forward to rereading them when I'm done.
you're able.
That's sort of going to be because I haven't read Dune since I started working on the series, because I sort of I set all the dials basically, and I didn't want to go back and like actually make it more like Dune than it already is. Because this was a risky gamble for me to like try to write something that's so in conversation with really like not the text, but like the core text of like this whole branch of science fiction was very risky. And most people, I think, like you said, who like Dune like it. But there is there's a minority population who has the opposite effect.
Okay.
And like very strong.
Wow.
And like, that's a sadness, but you can't control other people's feelings. And it bums me out. But
well, so Christopher, I won't take up all your time here, but I did have to ask, maybe I'll have to ask, but I wanted to ask about your personal faith and the Chantry. Like, how does that? So the Chantry have this like Inquisition type vibe. I mean, not just type vibe, they're Inquisitionists and they're like flaying people. And you're a Catholic yourself. How did that play? Like, they're not Catholics. They are from the cult of the old earth that's been exploded and stuff. But how did that play into, like, do you have Catholic family members who are like, hey, easy now, it's a little too close to home?
No, because it in a lot of ways it's just not right. But what happened is, this is actually like a really, like, not that I haven't been rambling the whole time. This is like a big question. I was born to a Catholic family, baptized Catholic, raised Catholic, did Catholic school through 8th grade. But then in 8th grade, my grandparents started dying. And they all died within about a year and a half of unrelated causes. This happened at exactly the same time I went into public school. And so the foundations sort of got knocked out from under my world. And consequently, I decided that I was an atheist. And I was an atheist for like all of high school and almost all of college, starting to change like right at the end. Towards the end, I was like, wait a minute. Being an atheist would require me to prove a negative. I must be an agnostic. No one could reasonably be an atheist, right? And so I like leveled up a little bit. In sort of doing this, I was working on the books early on, and I imagine, so the Chantry, right, is this sort of state religion. It's like very much got this sort of Roman emperor worship thing going on, but there are a lot of other elements to it, because what it is was cynically constructed by the imperial government at some point in the ancient past to tell this story for the people, right? This is sort of this is what a lot of people imagine like all religion is, because they don't know very much about religion. This is a very common trope in science fiction too, right? You've got this sort of like crypto Catholic, pseudo Catholic institution, right? You see this in Warhammer 40K, is my understanding. We see this in like Stargate as well, like towards the end of SG1, the Ori come in. The Ori are just space Catholics, but they worship demons. And like this is everywhere in science fiction and fantasy, right? Fantasy is lousy with it. And I was not at the time savvy enough to detect it. Because I also didn't care, right? I was trying to write the sort of silly, fantasy religion that is bad, right? And so they've got like little pieces of other religions, and then like their temples have minarets, right? They like do food sacrifices to idols, sort of in the fashion, right? And so they were grabbing all these like trappings of tradition to build this sort of pseudo pantheist state cult, basically, right? And they also are the judicial arm of the empire, right? Their primary function is basically policing the AI bit, right? Because there's not a like universal like computer band like in Dune, right? It's a little bit more granular than that. Because I also, in looking at Dune, I was like, there's no way you would ever be able to enforce the Valerian jihad, right? It's like, it's not just Hicks that's messing around with machines. Like everybody's doing it on the DL. You have to be policing this constant, right? And so this was sort of a world building thing I wanted to do to sort of, play with Dune, critique Dune, right? And do something different ultimately, right? And you're getting into book 2, you'll see it really hits the gas in book 2 with this particular thing. There's a lot of the forbidden technology examinations the books go on.
Yeah.
And so with the Chantry, I was sort of stuck with this problem because more or less right as I was finishing that first draft, things started to change for me. And I very slowly in stages came back to the faith. This was it's sort of people are always asking, or not always, but I remember I had a live stream and a gentleman asked me why, if I was so obviously clever, his words, not my, did I believe this obvious nonsense, right? And I don't think he realized that was like kind of a rude question. No, I think he meant it sincerely, the way it was phrased, but that was basically the question, and like the word obvious was used, right? And and I didn't do a very good job of answering the question. I like was completely like sort of flummoxed by it. And part of the trouble is that like he wanted a like intellectually satisfying answer to the question. And my reversion was really a consequence of like personal experience. I watched my wife was born Baptist and was sort of away from religion in general while we started to date. And then she converted to Catholicism, nothing to do with me because I was an agnostic at the time. And my wife, let's just say simply like, she had like a really tough run. And watching, what the church, what God did for her, was sort of like all the proof I needed. Like, I still like really struggle with any sort of personal relationship with God, right? Like it's like, what does that mean? Like, I do not feel like I've got, I've got someone out there listening, right? Or, I like my certainty now is sort of grounded in like the sort of the more, I guess philosophical proofs and, in Aquinas and things like that, right? Than it is out of any sort of personal thing. But what really tipped it off was watching my wife sort of like completely transformed, right? And it was really this like wonderful, beautiful thing. But then I was stuck with this book that this like earlier version of me who was dumb had written. And like, what do I do about that? And so I, fortunately, my first editor, I've had 3, basically was like, I love the book. It's amazing, but you also have to completely rewrite it. Cause like, it's a mess. And so I took the book apart and put it back together again. And it doubled in length, like we mentioned in the process. And the me that did the editing was a completely different person because of these experiences with, watching my wife, heal and, watching, just watching her, just be this new person. And like, what did that mean? And like wrestling with all of that, like in this very sort of personal way, but sort of by proxy. Cause like, it wasn't my religious experience. It wasn't my emotional experience. It was what she was going through. And it was so total, like, it was like, man, it just like, there's something there that I don't understand. And I still don't, but I know it's there, even if I don't understand it. And like, like we're human, like we never will. Right. But then I basically had to like figure out how to address this. And so I like, actually my solution was to dial up this religion is cynical, like thing to 11, and to, and I will then contrast it against, religious characters in the books. Some Christian, some not. There are like doctrinaire Zoroastrians in the books as well, who are sincere about that. And to sort of explore what the difference is. Because of course there are synthetic religions, like most of them are, right? But there are religions that we don't call religions that exist, here now, and people don't even see them. And so,
Star Wars.
there was Star Wars, sure, right? Harry Potter. I'm struck frequently when I go to science fiction conventions, like, oh, like this is a pilgrimage for like you guys, right? Like you were here to like, make sacrifices, and you're wearing the ritual
Let me just
costumes,
touch
and
the
you're
hem
like
of their
doing
robe so I can, as they pass by.
yeah. Yeah, let me get the signed picture, right?
Yeah.
I'll put that up right next to my statue of Concord, with the house gods, and it's like, yeah, here's Hestia and flash forward, right?
That's right. I have to watch myself
it
sometimes because I like the figurines and stuff. And I look over, I'm like, "Wait, is this an altar? What am I doing? Holy cow!"
yeah, yeah, no, it is tricky, right? You know, but yeah, no. So I had to sort of figure out what to do about that, and like I said, it was to like sort of it was to introduce complexity to the story. That was the solution. Like, be a better writer. Don't preach, actually, and I totally was, and I was preaching something in that first draft that I no longer
Yeah.
believed. And so there's something I don't know necessarily comes through in that first book. But I think as the series has gone on, like Frank Herbert, I've tried to correct
Mhm.
for, my initial indelicacies, my inaccuracies, mistakes. There's a little bit of not quite retconning, because I did try to adjust it in the first book, but it's it was a difficult problem, and hopefully that
No,
answers the
that
question.
totally doesn't. And at first, I had this.
No.
Well, I haven't read his Dark Materials yet, and partially because I have a whole bookshelf of C.S. Lewis books and books about C.S. Lewis, and I'm an evangelicals. Even though he probably wasn't, he's like our Augustine. So I have to be like, Philip Pullman is trying to make an anti-Narnia, and that's not okay. But I also study philosophy of mind, so I'm like, well, he's throwing panpsychism into the popular view, and that's pretty cool. So I have these like two Parkers, my theologian and my philosopher in my head, tearing each other apart. So at first I'm like, oh, maybe this is like his Dark Materials type, like religion's totally bad. We need something beyond that. But I came across this quote. I'd love to read it. Am I allowed to read from the book at all?
Yeah, go for
This
it.
is
I will look a Maris
well,
in the
that's
corner.
good. So
Yeah.
page 105, at least in this edition, says uh Hadrian's talking about the Chantry and says it was hypocrisy. And I was disgusted as only use can be by the sins of age and establishment. In my youthful cynicism, I had glimpsed one of those great truths, that for all the Chantry's talk of faith, they believed in nothing. They committed that ultimate and atheistic error, thinking that there is only power and that civilization arises only from the abuse of the innocent by the powerful. There is no more evil thought, and it was the soul of their false religion. And so I could not be a chanter or prior. And maybe that was a similar point that Pullman's trying to make. But I loved it, man. I thought it was so great that one line. I like to. I have a bunch of commonplace books where I take like quotes from what I read and I put them together, and that's
Sure.
definitely going in. Actually, my this one's my OC Bible. So this is
Nice.
quotations from sci-fi stuff. So you made it in there, man.
No, cool. I am honored. Yeah, no, Hadrian grows up in this cult. This is one of those things. He's like not really a man of his people, right? He's not buying it, right? Because it is fake, actually, right? And like deeply, deeply so. But they, this is sort of an archetype, even of like medieval literature. You have the priest who doesn't really believe, right? And there are like two responses you can have to that person, because like those people exist too. Like they're like manifestly, like there are bad Christians, right? There are bad priests, and Lord knows. But
Yeah, Scripture talks about
but
it. It's like, hey, look, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you guys doing this, because of you guys not acting like Jews, not acting like Christians, claiming our name, claiming the name of God.
yeah, this is an old this is an eternal
Yeah.
problem, right? And so there are two responses, right? One is to say, like that guy is, he's a bad guy, right? And the other thing is to say, well, all of it's fake because that guy is a bad
Yeah.
guy. And that second one doesn't follow, actually, right? Like, I remember I had lunch with a Hollywood producer. This was years ago. Wasn't for me. It was another writer I was there with who was maybe going to have an auction happen. And it came up at one point that I was Catholic during the lunch, and he looked at me and he said, "How do you stand it?" And like, I knew like what he was talking about was like, the problems the churches had. Right. And I was like, you're a Hollywood producer. How do you stand it? Right.
That's good.
Like, what are you talking
Yeah.
about? Um, um, the difference is like people don't spit on Hollywood producers when they walk down the street. A principle, right? It's but yeah, no. So Hadrian sort of has to the thing though with the Chantry, right, is that that there isn't a deeper truth there, right? Like, so with that, there has to be a deeper truth somewhere, and part of Hadrian's story is trying to figure out what it is. Um, and maybe he doesn't get all the way there, right? But let's just say neither did Moses.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. Christopher, I don't want to take all your time, dude. This is hard because I could talk for 10 more hours. I want to maybe try like rapid fire. So
yeah, I'll do my
yeah,
best.
yeah.
My one weakness.
Um, so this one's for like my Park Notes audience. That's my really big one about productivity and stuff. Dude, these books are huge, and I think you're pumping them out at least like once a year. Is that right? It's about every year.
Yeah, it's about once a year. I finish a draft of one of the novels in like 7 or 8 months
So
usually.
how do you do that? Can you help the audience? How do you remain productive? I know we've talked about it before on my channel, how like the muse and following your muse and stuff like that, and how that's a lot of writers are like, dude, that's not really it. It's a job. You need to like sit down and be structured. How do you
Yeah.
structure this? How do you like make yourself be productive?
Yeah, so you need a routine, and you get to decide what the routine is, right? You are, you're not your own slave, right? But for me, I'm a big outliner, so I outline the book in
Mm.
advance, and in like great detail. Like the outlines for these books are like as long as the first Harry Potter book. Like they're very very long. Um, and I treat that outline like a first draft, basically. Like it's just like I call it a low resolution first draft, right? So my chapters are like this long instead of 20 pages. And that because I find that most writers block is simply a failure to imagine what you're going to write, right? And like, this is maybe an obvious thing to say, right? But if you don't know what the scene is, right, you're trying to figure it out and get the prose right at the same
Uh,
time, impossible, right? Like way too much work. So after I've done the outline, it's a lot easier to sit down and just like look at the outline and say, what am I doing today? Oh, this thing. And then I'll sit down. I get up really early in the morning now. I have a 10-month-old, so I have to write before she wakes up,
yeah.
basically. And when she takes naps, and that's increasingly unreliable because she's getting bigger. And so I get up really early, at like 5, and I will write until she wakes up. And my goal is to write 1,000 words minimum, 2,000 words preferably, in any given day. You can set your own benchmarks, but those work for
Mm.
me. If I do not write 1,000 words, I do not count the day as worked.
Mm.
I put down in my spreadsheet tracking my progress that I did not write anything that day, and I forward the balance to the next day out of pity for myself. But 'cause sometimes like it's just hard. Like today, actually, I'm not quite there yet. I've written like 800 words. I had to delete a bunch of stuff and try over, and it was just a nightmare. Some days are bad. But if you write 1,000 words a day, that's really like not that hard, right? That's not a lot of writing. It sounds like a lot because 1,000 is a big number. It's like 3
Yeah.
pages. If you do that, 100 days later, which is like a little bit more than 3 months, you've written like a normal sized novel. Now, my books are really long. It takes me more like 250 days to write a whole draft. But if you keep doing that in little pieces, like you will get there. And it's easier to see the ending if you've done the outline. So you like know how far you can go. Like I can tell my agents and stuff to like within a week or two's margin of error, like when I will be done.
Wow.
Cause I know like my average per day and like I know about how long my chapters are on average because I'm tracking all of that. And I can say, hey, like I'll probably be done like September 2nd, right? Plus or minus 2 weeks,
Wow.
right? Like those are pretty big error bars, but they're a lot smaller than some authors' error
Yeah.
bars. Let's just
Half a
say.
year, or
Um,
2 years or whatever.
yeah, or something. And so yeah, it's just it's a question of like working every day and like, maybe I shouldn't cop to this, but like I work on the weekends too, like less, but like I tell myself that I enjoy my job. And so it's not really working. It's fine. But I don't do as much. Um, I'm a lot easier about letting it go on the weekends. But I find that if I stop even for a couple days, then like the momentum is all gone because there is a lot of sort of active memory involved in writing. You got to
You
remember
gotta remember the threads
little
going. Yeah,
detail.
totally. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's good. That's really helpful, actually. I do something similar with reading because I have to read philosophy, I have to read science fiction, I have to read fantasy, like, and maybe the same thing, but I have to read a bunch of different things. So I have daily goals. People get mad at me. They're like, that's not enjoying the book. I'm like, I'm going to read all my books. You're never going to read all your books because you're not.
Yeah, I'm gonna have fun, and you can't stop me.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Well, yeah.
So another thing, man, I appreciate you read like you're writing in the 1960s in the best way possible, right? So those are my heroes. That's where I really like. I've already told you this before. I like these people partially because they use GRE words. They use words that are on the graduate to whatever exam. My dad always forced me to have a higher vocabulary. He would like pronounce things really weird. That's frenetic, and make me learn what phonetic meant. But when I go through the old science fiction books, if there's a word I don't know, I mark that down. I have my own personal dictionary here, and then I learn new words. It's awesome. And you read like that. Like there's some words in here. I'm like, oh, that's a good one. Maybe I didn't know that, or maybe I forgot about it. That's good. Man, are you actively adding new words to your vocabulary? Is this because you're a Roman classicist and you just like the Latin and the Greek, or like how are you getting these words into your mind and then into your books?
It was reading mostly, right? Because like I read a bunch of those words, so a bunch of those same writers, right? So I will pick up words from that. But like, yeah, I mean, I do have mostly a Latin background actually. My Greek is almost non-existent. To my shame.
I'm the exact opposite.
But
so yeah, I had to take Greek in seminary, so I'm like, my Latin's terrible, and I pronounce it. People just roast me in the comments.
Yeah, well, the Latin pronunciation argument is like Church Latin is valid, guys. Actually, they spoke it for centuries. It's real. But no. So there's a little bit of that as well. But I am deeply fascinated by etymology. This is like maybe part of Tolkien's influence, right? And so, I whenever like my wife and I frequently be like, "What does that word mean? Like, why is that word that way?" And so I will go and like research that just for fun.
Yeah.
And like when you do that, you like learn a whole bunch of other things along the way, inevitably. So you learn new things but you like never know where a new word is going to come up. I like pretty famously like not a huge Neil Gaiman fan. But I was reading, I can't remember what Neil Gaiman thing it was. And like I learned the word Vavasor, right? Which is kind of like feudal lord, right? But it sounds like a Pokemon.
Dinosaur, yeah. Awesome.
Right. It's great. Vasor. It's like a vassal, basically. It's another word. And I was like, I am using this to death now. Right? Like you never know where you're gonna find a word that you like.
You particularly like glowering, I've noticed.
Glowering is good.
One.
Yeah.
Pick that up a few times.
Yeah, there's a lot of glowering. You apparently like the word entire a lot. Like doing the construction where it's like the world's entire. A couple of my readers been like, you need to stop that, man. And like now I will do it more.
Got to.
You gotta. Yeah, whenever my readers tell me not to do something, I'm like, well,
mistake.
You say
that's
that.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay, just like two more.
Yeah, no worries.
The Cielsen, man, let's say that like they're in our universe or whatever, or maybe we are in the Sun Eater universe. If they're rational beings, like they're different than us, but are they made in God's image, assuming that the humans are?
Oh man, that would be telling. Oh, that's like actually a spoiler.
Oh, okay, all right. So don't answer that. Don't answer that. Okay.
Yeah.
That's fascinating because that was Lewis's whole thing. This is not a spoiler for the Space trilogy, but you should read that book, or you should read at least Out of the Silent Planet.
One of these days.
I'm sure you get that all the time, so I'm sorry to be obnoxious about that.
No, it is okay. I've wanted to for a long time.
Well, I mean, I'm sure people are always like, read this book. If you like this, you have to read it. Like, yeah, okay, dude. There's only so much time in the world, and
yeah, at least you're not asking me for a blurb. That's like, man, that's an awkward situation every time. You're like, what if I hate it?
That's tough. Okay, this one's really important to me. Coming up with the Scholiast aphorisms, and I think actually Scholiast, is that a reference to scholastic? Like, did you get the same kind of root word there?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, a scholiast is like an index, basically. Like it's like a kind of
Oh,
book
sweet.
originally.
Okay.
So
Nice.
yeah, well, I may be misremembering that, but it's another old word. A lot of the words. This is the thing I stole from Gene Wolfe, along with as much as I could get away with. A lot of Gene Wolfe's words in like his Book of the New Sun are actually just very obscure words. He I don't think invents any words for that setting at all. He just uses archaisms. And I was like, that is genius. More of that, please. Because obviously, like, those words are real words. They are better than whatever I'm going to make
Yeah.
up.
That's
So,
that move is huge, actually. It's like an index, but you're making a person out. The same thing I like to tell people, because I study the philosophy of artificial intelligence, and I'll use computer in the old sense of the word, which means a human being. It computed, it did calculations.
computes, yeah.
People are like, no, a computer's a machine. I'm like, they tricked you. No, like we've so outmoded that part of our mind. We're so anti-mentat now that we think a computer is a digital device when it's not. Like
Yeah.
it's digital.
Yeah. Remember what they took from you.
That's right. That's right. So how do you come up with the aphorism then? Because that's what I love so much about Dune. And I think you do such a great job too. Now I write proverb next to it so I can go back and find them and put them in my commonplace books. But you loaded up a bunch in here. I love it. How do you come up with those?
I don't know that I have a really good answer for that, because it's sort of an imagistic thing. As a lot of them are they're like X is a Y, right? So like I was just like, that's going to be the construction, right? Or X is Y, like rage is blindness, right? And like that's like I think pretty just self-evidently true, right? Like if you are angry, like you are not being very clear-eyed about something, right? But you like make that you make the sort of abstract thing concrete, right? Hope is a cloud, right? Because you are maybe blinding yourself to one thing or another, right? Obviously, like hope isn't just that, right? And frequently what I'll do too is I will like have those I will subvert those aphorisms in some way. Right. There's a lot of like Hadrian wants to be a scholiast, but like, man, he is not suited for it actually. Right. Like he's like way too passionate. He's like way too emotional. And like he later, like he sort of learns like to give up on that. But like at the same time, he's always got this like little voice from his tutor being like, calm down, bro. Right. And like, so what you do, right, with what we're writing with those aphorisms is I try to make that sort of abstract feeling concrete, because then it gives you something to sort of think about. There's like a sort of mnemonic elements to it, right? It's like, okay, like, I am mad right now. Right. What am I missing? Right. Because I'm blind, right? You just sort of, this is one of those things that like make stories in the first place, like so effective, right? Is they take sort of abstract ideas and like concretize them in like a situation. And so you could do that in like a story, right? Or like, you're talking about commonplace books. Like you do this with a Kreia, right? Like the old, like Greek sort of, like almost like anti-Coan, right? Where it's like a story, like the story about, Alexander, and oh gosh, it's not Diomedes. It's, oh gosh, the other D name, lives in a barrel.
Oh,
Diogenes.
yeah.
I always get those two
Diogenes,
names messed up because it's too close. But yeah, Diogenes is the man. That story about him, Alexander meeting Diogenes in the barrel, right? If I were on Alexander, I'd want to be Diogenes, right? Like the story doesn't contain the points in it, right? But like because it's the story, you get the points, right? And so it's the same basic principle. It just like in very, very short form. So that you can put them, you can sign them on the title pages of the book.
That's so good. That's Herbert's epigraphs are like that. You're like, dang, I love it, man. That's so good. I found that when you look, almost invariably, when you look for a fictional wise character, there's actually wisdom there. And you could be the goofiest author, but they're like trying to imagine what would Master Shifu or Oogway say in Kung Fu Panda. And then it's like, whoa, wait, that's actually really profound. How'd you come to that? And like, I just thought, what would this really smart turtle say? And you're like, dang, dude, I'm going to actually put that in my commonplace book. That was amazing. So we have it in us. We just need to pull it out by.
Yeah, I guess that's a point for Platonism, right?
Yeah, that's right, man. Let's scrolling up. That's good. All right. So I just want to leave you with something. So I have two different lobes. I'm a philosopher and theologian. Never. All my theology work is done on the problem of evil and the authorial analogy that God relates to the world like an author does to his or her book. And I mean, it fits really well. If you read the Bible, God spoke and it was. God created the world by his word, by his logos. And so, man, that's the way that I see the world. And so I see you imaging God in creating stories. And I think you do a really good job because they're good stories and they're inviting, they're readable, they're enjoyable, but also like, I think you get the right things right. I think you're like not degrading society by giving us a trash story that makes me feel icky after I'm done reading. But it's like, man, I feel like,
Well, that's a huge
yeah,
relief.
man, I want to be a better person because of reading your books. And I don't know if that was the goal or not, but it's the case. So thank you, man.
Yeah, well, it's nice to hear that because above all else, do no harm. I think it should apply to more than
Mm,
physicians. Um,
good.
so thank
Yeah.
you.
Like there's some kind of ethics of narrative that I want to like think through and hopefully not ruin genres because of it. Cause like nothing like a philosopher getting his hands on something beautiful and just shredding it to pieces. But I do want to chew on that a little bit more. I I feel like Hadrian because I'm a philosopher in training. People are always like, "You're not quite a philosopher." I'm like, "Yeah, but I publish stuff." Nope, you're never actually quite a philosopher if you're for YouTube. But man, I'm a wrestler. I'm a passionate guy. I'm angry, and sometimes when someone like shreds my paper, I'm like, "Let's fight. Let's go outside." And it's totally not how you're supposed to act in academic settings. So I'm like, I resonate with him totally.
Yeah, well, you're in good company, right? You're like Plato. You know?
This is good, man. We should just keep talking about these compliments. This is amazing. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Let's
yeah.
go.
Dude,
But
this has been awesome. Thanks for all your time too. Like this has been huge. You got a daughter, I got a daughter. I really appreciate you coming on to grace my podcast here. Thanks for the books. And can you tell us when's is it the sixth book that's coming out?
the sixth book is out on April 2nd. So it's on Tuesday. It's the 28th is as we're recording. So it'll be out really, really soon. That's Disquiet Gods is book 6 in the Sun Eater series. Empire of Silence is the first one. Yeah, I am working on book 7. It should be done by the end of the year.
Awesome, man. I'm excited for it. I I pre-ordered the hardcover because I saw how hard it is to get a hardcover. So I will have this one at least. And it'll take me some time to get to it. But thanks so much, man. This has been huge. Actually, can you
Yeah,
promote?
no,
I'm going to
of
promote
course.
your YouTube channel, but I'll
Yeah,
put
sure.
the link in the description for all the folks. Can you just say what it is for the audio folks?
Yeah, the YouTube channel is Sun Eater Books. So it's youtube.com/Sun Eater Books. I am on there relatively infrequently. I don't do a lot. I post like a writing update video once a month, and I'll do a live stream once a
Yeah.
month. I like to say I'm not really a YouTuber, but I'll do that. And if there's something going on, like there'll be an announcement video.
There's some random writing tips that are actually like goals about like world building and stuff like that I've been looking up and really cool stuff.
Yeah, I want to do more of those. The problem is I have no idea how to make YouTube short thumbnails flattering. So
That's all of our trouble, dude. Yeah, I feel that.
yeah.
All right. Well, folks, that's going to have to do it for now. This has been Parker's Pensées. And as always, all glory to God.